Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
I'm Frances Simon now. I'm 5 guys from home. My father's name was Yaslo. My mother's name was Blima. They had 7 children. I'm the second oldest. I have a brother in Chicago. We're very close. I myself have 3 children. Milton, Bruce, and Frank. My oldest son is 32. He's married. He's an attorney. He's the father of a 5-month-old little girl. My second son got married 3 weeks ago. He married a girl converted to Judaism. It was very hard on me, but that was his choice. He's a wonderful boy otherwise. And the girl seems like a nice girl, and she promised to practice Judaism the best she can. My youngest son is going to be 23 this month. He graduated Northridge. He's a wonderful boy. He went to Hebrew school till he was 8. He does not believe in religion, but he's a pretty good Jew, and I hope he'll marry a Jewish girl one day soon. My husband is Albert. He's also from the same background. They were 10 children, 4 survived. 2 already died since. He's got a sister here who brought us out to America. Very nice lady. She's married to a German Jew and has 1 daughter. We're very close. Life was very good to us in America. We made lots of friends. We're very comfortable. A lot of people helped us, and we help a lot of people in return. No matter where we go or whoever we meet, we feel comfortable with people from the same background. I do have friends, American friends, which I talk to them about my background, and they were absolutely amazed. They think sometimes that maybe I exaggerate or tell them stories that's hard to believe. But after I introduced them to some books, and I took them to certain 39 Club and different lectures and different books, and Elie Wiesel, and told them about experience in Washington. And they heard a lot, and they appreciate I'm different in many ways, and we get along fine.
In what way are you different?
Oh, everything. Our thinking, our values, our background, our experiences, and I appreciate them for what they are. And they might think I'm different, but somehow we have fun. We really still manage to have a good time. We go out, and I love life, and we go vacations, and we spend weekends like even tonight. I started out 2 couples to go out for dinner. We wind up 14 people. Everybody calls up, what are you doing? It's too cold to go to a movie. There's nothing on television, let's go out. And from 2 couples, we wind up 14 couples, 7 couples, so we had to separate tables. And probably wind up having a good time because everybody tries to contribute something.
How do you explain this desire to have a good time, to
just
enjoy?
Catching up the times that we missed.
Why don't you tell us about those times?
The times, actually, we had no youth, so to speak, because our life was so simple where I grew up. It was a small town right by the Polish border. It was only about 35 Jewish families. And everybody was really sort of backward in a way. If you were different, you were already, let's say I was a girl and I was a fun-loving girl, but there was no such thing as dating, or there was no place to go to a movie or to dance unless there was a wedding. And if you acted different, then you were sort of loose or an outcast, so you had to toe the line. You had to be very proper, otherwise nobody would even have anything to do with your family if a girl was promiscuous, or that was unheard of. And in a way it was good because it kept people to know the right way or the wrong way. Just to give you an example, we were 7 children, 5 girls and 2 boys. In the hometown, after we finished the 8th grade, there was very few could afford to go to a high school, which was about 50 kilometers away, or a college, unless you were brilliant, was about 150 kilometers. And that was like you would send your child to Europe proportionately. It was very expensive. And if you had a little money, you spend it on the boys, because the boys' education came first. You know, he has to make a living, he has to be learned. So my brother was sent to the yeshiva. I was the oldest of 5 girls, and even to dress, you had to make clothes. It wasn't advantageous that one should be a dressmaker to be able to save money and to look nice. So I didn't like being a dressmaker. I would have preferred to go to high school. By the time I finished 8th grade, the Hungarians came. That was in 1939. I was 14 years old. I was born in 1925. There was no more higher education for Jewish. So that was just the timing. Anyway, I probably wouldn't have gone to school because the parents felt, and it was something strange, the minute people got educated, they got assimilated and went away from the harsh life of being strictly Jewish and strictly religious and strictly, observant. So the parents tried, even if they would have been able to afford college or high school for kids, they did not feel it was wise, especially for a girl. So I went away from home like 100 kilometers to learn how to sew. I was like apprentice to a family that helped with the dishes, diapered the kids, and shop groceries, and then they allowed me to watch how to make clothes. And I was very good at it. And there was at home never a discussion about, my father was more modern than my mother. And he says, you're going to be in this city, and you're a pretty girl, be careful how you behave. Because they didn't talk about sex or not having fun or anything. They just said, whatever you do will reflect on your sisters. That's all he had to tell me. And I listened because that was the only way. I was already more lucky that I could go away from home. In the city there was already a movie, you could dress differently. There was already, a hachshara that you could go Saturday and learn Hebrew songs and a little dancing, Hebrew songs and dancing, and a little social life, nothing else, just talking about eventually maybe go to Israel. It was started to be a dream. But if you came home and you mentioned that you want to go to Israel, the rabbis and the teachers and even the parents, they didn't want to let go of the kids. They felt you go way too far. Israel is far away, and it's the Arabs and the war. Something was heard that's rough, life is rough, in songs and in stories, how they dig ditches and they die of malaria. A lot of kids could have been saved if the people would have been a little bit more, informed. Because if the rabbi says you can't let your kids go to Israel, they become free and non-observant. The parents, we had to go on the sneak to these things, to these meetings. But later on, they already accepted it. By the time they would have wanted to send their kids, it was too late.
Where was this taking place?
That was in a small town in the Carpathian Mountain. It's called Iskis. It was right near the Polish border. The nearest train was 20 kilometers. The nearest hospital was about 100 kilometers. And the religion kept us going. We were very hardworking and very resourceful. We had a farm. My father was a cattle and horse trader. That was already a fairly good living. But we had a lot of poor relatives in it was something, if you had to share. If a brother's horse died, you had to give him a horse. If a sister's children were barefoot and you had no shoes, it was a sin that your kids had shoes or food. You had to share.
So is this kind of like the way life was in the Carpathians in Czechoslovakia?
In that part where yes, because people were very decent, very simple and very decent, and one helped the other. If there was a poor family, they just went from house to house on Friday or on Thursday, and they came in, what can you spare? And whatever they could spare, they gave. It was just, if there was extra milk, they gave them extra milk. If the sheikh came in, we were sort of better off because we had a farm and could slaughter our calf or our sheep, and there was a little extra food. My mother used to take over to this one neighbor something, take over. And I remember was so selfish. I used to fight with her. He says, Dad works so hard. How can you give away so much? And I says, you're just not, that she's not thrifty enough. And she gave me a good slap over the face. She said, don't you ever deny people who are hungry. And I remember that now. She already knew that, I don't know, you can't just have food and the other person shouldn't. So if one was in need, you helped. It was automatically.
Do you explain your behavior years later from the example that your mother and father set?
Indirectly, yes, but at the time I resented it. I felt we should have more. We were 7 children, and I felt we didn't have I never had a toy. I never knew what it is. I never had a book. I used to borrow that from somebody who had. But somehow or other we grew up just the same. We were wholesome. We were not delinquent. We were not... so not having things doesn't deprive you really in the long run.
No. How did your life change once the Hungarians came?
Once the Hungarians came, everything changed because they took away the able-bodied men. They took away the businesses. Oh, the young boys went away. So when you were 15, 16, there was, just everything was very drab. There was nobody to talk to. Everybody worried for their sons. Sometimes took weeks and months till they got a letter. Some of them were sent to Poland and to Russia to dig ditches, and some of them were informed they got lost or they died. And it was like a cloud hanging all over us. We just knew that something bad is coming. And sure enough, in 1944, that was Pesach, we were already under a house arrest. It was like a curfew. We couldn't leave town or get out of the house. And the day after Pesach, they told us to pack as much as we can, food and clothing. And they loaded us up, like I told you, on the wagons, and we went.
Wasn't it something very important that your father could have saved?
We could have. There was a peasant that offered my father that my father used to smuggle horses from Poland, which were just over the border, and that guy did business with my father for about 20 years. He was a very decent guy, and he respected my father very much, and he was the one who came forward. He says, I have this mountain cabin. It was just like a winter, was actually like a stable. He said, there is enough hay, I'll bring you food. And you can, and he just admired my brother, who was very, very capable. And he had a daughter, and he used to say, if he wouldn't be Jewish, I would love to have him as a son-in-law. But to be Jewish is like a calm down. Like he would say, if he wasn't black or Gentile, I would like to have him as a son-in-law. But he was a decent enough guy. And I remember my mother and father talking this over with this guy. His name was Yura, that he offered to hide us out. And they said, how could we hide and the rest of the people are going? What's the purpose in living, even if whatever is going to happen to the rest of town, it's going to happen to us? And they believed so strongly that a miracle will happen, that who would want to bother us? We didn't do nothing to nobody. And half of it was believable because somehow or other they knew that Stalingrad fell. That I remember that word being, the Stalingrad fell and the Germans were beaten already. That was, I don't know exactly when Stalingrad fell. You might know about it better. But we were taken sometimes to Pesach, it was end of March or beginning of April. We also heard in Africa Rommel was losing the war. We didn't know about the Second Front, or I don't remember ever recalling it. But we felt somehow the Russians will come and save us. We didn't count that the Americans will come from, because that was so far away. The Russians were just around the corner practically. My parents never believed that the Germans could do anything so badly, because in World War II, my father was in the war. World War I. And the Germans were friends with the Jews. They were stationed in our home, because that was by the front. The people had to evacuate, but they stayed in the homes and they shared what they had when they came back. They were decent. They were, they spoke almost the same language, German and Jewish. They were only afraid of the Russians at the time, because they came and they kidnapped the men and took them to Russia. They raped the women. They plundered whatever they could get. They were afraid of the Russians, but they were never afraid of the Germans. So it's just somehow they fooled themselves. It was hope against hope that somehow in the last minute. There was, when they knew they were going to take us from the ghetto, there was a rabbi in the town of Valava. He was very, very saintly man, but also a bright man. And I don't know if you ever heard this through history, when the Jews are in dire danger, that they called a trial, and they subpoenaed God. Did you ever heard about that? Mm-hmm. My father was one of the 10. He was not a religious man, but somehow he was very respected. He was considered as a smart man. We were hungry and fasting anyway, but they asked, and that was maybe a week before they took us. We knew that they were already...
This was in the ghetto?
In the ghetto in Khust. There was about 10,000 people there, and there was shortage of food already, and people were starting to get sick, and everybody started getting lice, and we just didn't care already where they took us, just to get away from there, because we knew the famine was getting bad, and we were sleeping like in one stable, 10, 12 families, just wall-to-wall people. They were just living out of packages, and it was just unbearable. The crowded, the people started quarreling and fighting, and it was just very, very miserable. So that was this trial. My father didn't talk about it much, but it is subpoenaed God. It is in Jewish Adin Torah, like calling God to answer why he's doing this to the people. Well, he didn't show up. They took us. It was
God didn't show up at the trial.
That was sort of like a secret meeting. Very few people knew about it. That being my father was one of them, so we knew about it. And I don't know. We thought it's like a joke, that it's silly, but yet our parents, they believed in it. But we already thought that was a silly thing to do.
Did they talk about it? Did your father talk about it when he came back?
No, but I knew it from my brother, and we sort of thought it's a silly thing that, like, I don't know, like voodoo magic or something. I don't know what it was, but I remember it. But I was hoping that it's going to work. The night they took us, it was raining, like today was raining, but that is nothing. We walked with our packages about 10 kilometers. And it was so dark, and maybe 10 Hungarian was watching us. He could have really just stepped off on the sidewalk and got lost in the rain or got lost in the dark. But there was nowhere to go. We knew there was, I don't know, we just didn't have even the courage to try at least to escape, maybe a few with us. But I was thinking I had to just step over 10 feet and I would have been out of sight because it was so dark.
Were you thinking of doing that?
it occurred to me, but I would just never abandon my parents because the feeling was so close. Whatever's going to happen to them, where was I going to go? What? No money, no, I didn't know the area or anything. Some did hide, and most of them didn't make it. Either they shot them or brought them to the ghetto.
Did you know that there were Jews being exterminated elsewhere, or was it just a fear of
No,
doom?
we knew because that something drastic will happen, but we somehow, 4 years before, they took here and there a dozen families, and they took them to Poland and shot them. And some of them managed to run away, and they came back and they told the truth, and we knew it was the truth, and we still somehow believed it and have it. We knew it was the truth, but it's amazing. Jewish people are the most, I don't know, just foolish optimists, I think. It was just to the point of ridiculous how much they blacked out these terrible things.
Did you black it out?
I was not young enough, old enough or smart enough to really fully comprehend it. I just somehow, we were really actually in a daze in a way. We knew something terrible was going to happen and almost didn't care, believe it or not. Just somehow, I don't know, accepted. We were such strong believers that we felt maybe it's a punishment from God. Maybe we deserved it because Jewish people always suffered. It's a curse that somehow or other, it's like another form of program. And basically the rabbis always warned the youth is not observant, that something bad will happen. It was almost like we expected something, a punishment will come, because the young people were already not that anxious to follow the footsteps. And we knew it from the Bible reading that the temple was destroyed, Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed because the people that were not righteous or doing terrible things. We didn't do any terrible things, but we felt maybe somehow other Jewish people are doing terrible things and we're paying the price for it.
So you never felt like you were bad or you were naughty?
We were not bad. We were really as good as people can be. We were just too busy even just eking out a living. What was there to be bad of it? There was nothing. There was no drugs. There was no alcohol. There was no... if you talk to a boy, you already were, suspicious. So people really were very, very straight and narrow. And just to give you an example, when my father was a soldier in World War I, he came back like a little officer or something, a sergeant or something, and still in the uniform. And there was a lot of weddings in World War I too. And there was a wedding, and he was there to ask my mother to dance, like a girl and boy. That's how people thought. There was no dancing, men and women. And a fight broke out, and they felt my mother was too modern and too... She was just the simplest, nicest girl. But it was already... I think you probably think this is like an evil... what do they call it?
Medieval.
Medieval, but that was only 60 years ago. Mm-hmm. Or 60, what was World War I? They got married in 21. So it's 62 years ago. But it's might as well be like 200 years ago in that part of the world. What was I just saying?
You were marching. Remember, it was raining.
It was raining, and we were just soaking wet. And by the time we got there, we put on... Whatever we had, we put on us because we were afraid they're going to take it away. Anyway, they searched us bodily, whether we swallowed coins or money or women, men. It's just undescribable. Anything of value, they took away. And they packed in the people in the wagons like sardines. They put in a bucket for elimination, 1 or 2 buckets. No water, no nothing. We were 3 days in the... It was already June. It was already, beginning of June. It was already hot, and just that little window in that bucket, and there was like a curtain. So many women and children, if they had to go to the bathroom, all shame ceased. We were already so dehumanized, and the stench, and It was overflowing excrement, and some people were sitting in it, and some were lying in it. And I remember one night the train stopped. That was maybe after a day's ride. It was cool. And I looked through the window. There was a next-door neighbor. He was like 15 years older. He was so-called educated because he used to read newspapers and had a few books. He was a bachelor. He was sitting and talking to me. And he knew where we were going, and he still tried to tell me, maybe somehow it's not as bad. Maybe they won't have time to do anything drastic to us. And as the train was standing, I remember seeing a fire, and a group of gypsies with like covered wagons. They used to travel from town to town, and they had a fire, and you could see children running around. I said, how lucky these people are. They're free. Nobody bothers us. And we choose so-called chosen people. And I mentioned that to him. I don't remember what he said, but that picture of those free gypsies, how I envied them when we used to go pass by our town. There was a lot of gypsies. We used to just hide because they always said I was very dark. And I remember they used to say, don't go to gypsies because they mistake you and they kidnap you. They used to kidnap Jewish children, believe it or not, if they were dark. At least they said. I never knew anybody who did it, but that's what they used to say. And I remember that in my mind, that they told me not to go next to the gypsies or they kidnapped me. And I said, how lucky they are. They're there, and here we are. And we came, it was at night.
Let me ask you, did you ask your father, whom you adored and you admired, to try to explain what was happening to you?
When?
When you were in these wagons?
In the train, you mean going to Auschwitz? People just didn't talk. Everybody was just like numb. You couldn't talk. What was there to explain? What were there to ask? That would have been a foolish question to ask. I don't even remember my parents in that wagon. It's so just completely out of my mind. I don't remember how my father looked. If I wouldn't have this picture, I wouldn't remember how my mother looked. I have here a cousin who is an American. His father is my oldest brother. No, his father was my father's oldest brother. And he looks exactly like my father. His name is also like my father, Joseph Weiss. As a matter of fact, we're going to have dinner tonight. His voice is the same like I remember my father's. He walks somehow the same walk. But I wouldn't remember my father. Just completely like amnesia.
In this cart, who were you with? In this wagon?
In this wagon were all people from my hometown. Most of them, as I said, most of the able-bodied young men were already in the labor camps. It was women, children, and men over 55 or so. There was about 100, as many as like sardines. By the time we got out of the wagon, I don't know, some people were ready. 3 days in the ghetto we were hungry. 3 days we were without food altogether. Dehydrated. You arrived at night, you let out and you see screaming and you see those ovens, and you see, we were just like so bewildered. Then they took us, separate the women from the men. I know how I got separated from my mother and from my sisters. It's still, I can't remember it, absolutely don't remember it. I blocked it out, I don't remember. But I wind up with girls from my hometown, about a dozen. Nobody was over 25. The youngest was, I think, 17. And we wound up, after they shaved us and they showered us, they call it, they loused us, they disinfected. We came out, we didn't recognize each other. They put us in, we walked to the barracks, they put us in those wooden bunks. And I don't know what they gave us in that soup or in that food. Just somehow we couldn't even think. We didn't cry, we didn't talk, we were just walking around like, I know I asked somebody, when are we going to see the mother? So he says, she bluntly told me, she says, your mother, you see that fire? And you think I cried? I didn't cry. I envied them. I wished I would have been there with them. Later on, we somehow, I don't know, managed to adjust. Some of them were taken away in different camps. I was in Auschwitz the whole time, till Auschwitz was evacuated. Through the worst, to the worst, the hottest summer, the coldest winter, the harshest inspections. I didn't have once a cold. I didn't have one pimple on my body. I only got beaten once when I told you. It's just like somehow God would have been watching me or something. I managed to survive the march. I managed to survive really the worst camps. And I came out fairly in good health.
Excuse me, can I go back for a minute?
Yeah.
Remember you telling me how you took care of 4 young girls and why you took care of them?
They were not that young. They were my age. They were just not that resourceful as I am. But we adopted 2 young girls that were really, one was 15 and one was 17. And we looked, actually I looked after them.
Where was this? This was in the camp
In
already?
In the camp, because there were 2, one was 15, one was 17. It was sort of like lost sheep. And if you were alone, if you got sick or if you fall behind, we sort of included it. We were fairly strong comparing to others. If you were in the age bracket of, let's say, 18 to 23, 24, you had the best chance. You were that time mentally and physically still the strongest. If you were a child of 14, 15, by miracle, if you were there, if you got sick and you had nobody to look after, they were not so strong to look after themselves. Even you had to pry them to go for that miserable food. It wasn't worth it to most of them. They just lied. It was easier to lie there or whatever, even to take care of their bodily needs or just get a little water and wash yourself. And if somebody was reminding you or encouraging you or bringing some extra little bite to you, you had a better chance. And for some reason, I was lucky enough to somehow manage always get a little something extra. I used to make like slippers or I made turbans or I made these aprons for the girls who worked with the hand. And if they gave me like a piece of bread this big, if somebody would give you now $100,000, you wouldn't find it so valuable or so appreciated. People died because of lack of water. In the train, people just got dehydrated. I took a chance eating the snow. I felt it's better to get poisoned from the cold than die of thirst. Water was so precious. Somehow or other, as we were standing when we were already in the trains, there was a private train. And in German, I mentioned, do you have some water or do you have some food? And just by miracle, somebody threw us some bread. But if you didn't take the courage to ask, you wouldn't get it. I don't know, somehow or other, the last minute, something somehow showed up. In the last camp, when we were, one day they asked, they needed people that know how to sew. And I said to these 5 girls, well, we know how to sew. He says, well, we don't know. I said, just say you know. Let's get out of here. Maybe we'll wind up doing something, just not laying there. And I told you, I always had a beat. And we always just put a little color in our face. And I spoke fairly good German. I mean, I speak Jewish, so the German was understandable. And they took 8 girls, and took us to a mattress factory to pull buttons by hand. You had to have a long needle and 2 buttons like the old-fashioned mattresses. And we come there, and there is an old SS, and he says, well, show us what to do. And he just cursed in German. He says, I don't want you to work. The Russians are around the corner. Why would they? Why should you work? They're going to take away the mattresses anyway. So he says, just sit. And I says, who are these people? So he says, these are French prisoners of wars, men and women. we had to march about 10 kilometers to that camp, and they used to get already Red Cross packages, and they were treated a little better than we were. And that camp, that was about 10 kilometers from Munich. It was like a forest on top and underground. There were the biggest ammunition factories, and Yugoslavs and French and Russian prisoners of war and Polish. They're political prisoners. They were still treated with a little, at least they needed the work. Some Jewish girls worked in other places, but not in this place, in ammunition factories. Here we were just waiting either to be killed or to be liberated or whatever.
I'm a little confused on just on
Yeah.
where we went. You started in Czechoslovakia and
We
the
started
ghetto
in Hungary, actually.
In Hungary.
Yes.
Okay. And then you were taken by train to
Auschwitz.
Auschwitz. And the mattress factory is where?
That was already not in Auschwitz. I was in Auschwitz till January 18th. And from there, the Russians were coming, so they evacuated us. Most of Auschwitz was not too many people. There were maybe 3,000-4,000 people left. I worked in a Weberei that we worked. I don't know what we were doing. We were cutting rubber, strips of rubber with fabric, and they said that was to detone bomb. That was like making explosions.
Mm-hmm.
And we were making these long, they were maybe 30 yards or 40 yards long. We were like braids.
Mm-hmm.
We had to cut the rubber and cut that certain material, and that was for war purpose because there was no other purpose. And we cut it with, the shears weren't always sharp, but we had to produce a certain amount of 30, I think it was 30 yards a day. And some people, it was so cold in there, the hands wouldn't work. We didn't have the energy to cut. But they made me like I was like the manager of it, and there was these 8 girls, and there was a woman, an elderly woman. She was the only one in our group, was maybe 40 or 45. She had a son who was a chimney sweep. I don't know where he worked, but there were 2, 3, whether in the crematorium or other factories, he was a chimney sweep. And he used to come to visit his mother once in a while. And he always managed to bring the mother something to eat. And she shared it with me because I made her portion. Mm-hmm. I made like worked for myself and worked for her. Or if not, somehow in the last week nobody checked, or in the last few months actually nobody checked. So we had baskets, and underneath we used to just put what do they call, Abfall. The scraps, and on top we used to put it, the basket should look full. Nobody already counted or measured that accurately. But somehow or other you had to have this amount of baskets. So I used to work for this old lady, because if she wouldn't have produced enough, they would have killed her, took her out of there, and just like a useless worker. So I worked there maybe for 3 months. And that was really, in a way, that saved us, because we were at least inside. We were not outside, had to stay already to be counted every day for hours. And they maybe give us a little food already, a little extra food, because we were so-called useful workers. But then when they marched us out of Auschwitz...
Excuse me, you told me something very interesting. Before you marched, what saved you? You broke into a...
There was like a riot. Just when they were saying we have to evacuate, and in that riot there was a big magazine, not a magazine, what do they call it? A supply room or a warehouse. They had some flour and they had some potatoes, and they had also extra blankets. And I managed to get a hold of, steal 5 blankets, and I made like, what do they call it, like pajamas. That cut out in one with mittens. In the front it was just with strings, we tied it on. And it was like over the feet, and had pieces of things over our ears. And we put it on, and if they would have caught us with this, that we sabotaged these blankets, we probably would have gotten shot. But we didn't care. The girls helped me sew. I cut it, and they sewed it. We pulled the thread from
That was
From
that was the
at
group of four
night.
girls who
Five girls.
Five girls who you
Five
kind of
girls.
took care of.
There were four sisters, and I was sort of, we grew up together. And that, more or less, I felt saved us from being frozen, because when we were about 6-7 days in those wagons, every morning there were 7-8 dead people, like piece of lumber just thrown out of the train. And we were sitting on them. They were next to us, and we weren't scared. We just hoped that we'll die soon. We don't have to suffer. It was unbelievable what a human being can endure. We somehow managed. We stood in line to get a train when finally they put us in another train to go to Ravensbrück. Matter of fact, we were talking about it, and this friend of mine says, that was the children's. I said, I didn't see any children, but she said that was the children. We were in a tent, and it was raining, and we were in the mud, sitting in the mud. We couldn't stay. How long can you stay? You finally just sit down in the mud, and either you doze off, or you die, or you whatever. There we were maybe a week, and from there they took us to Malchow, which was near Berlin. That for a while was better because it wasn't raining. That was already in April. It was already, the weather was a little better. And that's when somehow in Ravensbrück or in Malchow, when I told you I found a prayer book.
Yes.
And I was praying with the girls. I was singing to the girls. We were just from weakness. There was nothing to do. There was very little food. And we were already so skinny and so just actually on the point of starvation. We looked not human anymore, most of us. And that's where I just felt, we heard bombing. Berlin was bombed day and night. We saw the light, the sky was lit up like practically daylight. And we were just thrilled that that is happening. Whether we die or not, we just felt if Berlin is destroyed, that's going to be just at least that much, that that they're going down with us. I don't know how I managed to sing, how I managed to pray, how I managed to all kinds of stories. We amused ourselves with recipes, with planning. If we get liberated, what we're going to cook. I used to say, why do people have to cook when bread is so delicious? We just felt that bread, and it was most of the time was green. What do they call it when bread gets stale, moldy? The mold tasted absolutely unbelievably like the finest cake or the finest candy. Whenever they brought us food, as I said, most of it that was spilled because the people were just like animals. If they brought the kettles, they just ran to it, and half of it they didn't even have time to lay it out. The stronger ones still managed to get something. The weaker ones, I don't know. I just somehow wondered. They just, you eventually die from weakness, and you just fall asleep, and you saw young faces and young bodies, and it was the survival of the fittest. The rougher and the tougher ones somehow still managed even to steal or beg or whatever.
How do you fit in with that group?
Never in my life stole this much, except those blankets in the riot. I always somehow managed to get help, I don't know, out of the air. Somehow it came. Like when we were already in Malchow, when everybody was so starving, when I told you, they asked for 8 girls to that mattress factory. We were already barely walking. And I volunteered. Something made me, I never volunteered before to anything. Even when they, for transport or something. Never. I just felt nothing to lose, just to get out of the camp. Maybe we'll dig up something. We came to that mattress. There was only just like a few rooms with some mattresses and fabrics. It was already.
This is already when you were just outside of Berlin.
That was outside of Malchow, where I told you there was so camouflaged when we walked to that mattress factory. I mean, we were small town girls, village girls actually. We just couldn't believe, seeing how they were fortified. That was a beautiful place. You wouldn't believe it. A gorgeous forest. big, everything was so industrialized, everything was so modern, everything was such a huge, we just, maybe we were, because we were small town girls, maybe we were so intimidated by everything. It looked to us very modern and everything very organized. We came to, so this German told us, don't work, and he gave us some pieces of bread or something. He told us he's from Berlin, and his only son is in the Russian front, and his home is bombed out, and he said, the hell with it, don't work, go and see if you can get some food. And he sent us to this kitchen, where all these French prisoners, or French, what do they call them?
Prisoners of war?
Prisoners of war and political prisoners, because they wore different stars. Homosexuals, all kinds of things, whatever, they still were useful young men, but they were imprisoned, and they had to work in these factories, and they were given heavy, decent food. So they didn't know who we were, and we just came for food, and they gave us, like in regular military dishes. We never ate anything so delicious. And we asked whether we can take home with us. And they gave us some potatoes, and we packed on our body, and we came back, and the girls, they just discovered a big treasure. And that lasted maybe for a week. And then they didn't let us. But in that week, that food, it was wholesome, and that kept us going. These 5 girls, and we shared it with others if we could. But then they stopped. But I think without that food, somehow, we couldn't have made it. Like in the last minute, it was really, that was really a miracle. It was my doing, because I encouraged them to come, but they didn't make us work there. Afterwards, the Russians came, and the Germans ran away. It was another riot, but in that riot I didn't go already, because I knew I couldn't survive it. They also, whatever was left, but it wasn't cold anymore. We didn't need it, that extra clothing. And we marched a day or two with Germans. The German population was running away from the Russian front. And we got already mixed up between them. So we already saw, maybe we'll have a chance to make it if they don't bomb us or a bullet, or Germans don't recognize us and kill us. The Nazis already took off their uniforms, and they were already marching with us. Some of them we recognized that they were in their civilian clothes.
What kind of clothes were you wearing?
Striped clothes, white and gray. That wooden striped clothes. Well, the regular, what a prisoner.
Didn't anybody recognize the fact that you were a prisoner?
They did, but the Germans were running. I mean, we marched out of the camp. Nobody stopped us. I think they told us to leave or whatever. I don't remember exactly. But we left, and we got already. The roads were full of, what do they call, flüchtlings, the ones that run away.
Deserters. The German deserters?
The German deserters, no, the civilian when they run away, when they flee.
Refugees?
Refugees, German refugees that fled, but German occupied, part of where not West Germany is now. What do they call it? East Germany is now.
East Germany.
Oh, the German refugees from the Russian front as it was moving forward.
Magdeburg, Ravensbrück, all these areas, there were thousands, also women with children, with elderly people, and they were carrying their packages, and they were in trouble too in a way, because they left everything, but nothing comparing to us. They didn't bother us already, because they just were glad that we don't bother them. We came to a town, I forgot the name, and it was, you could just walk in, and anyway, the Russians were there already. And the Russians asked us who we are, and we said we're Jewish. They said, accused us that we work for the Germans. They didn't believe that we are just what we really were, because they were really terrible people. And somehow I wound up on a farm, and we had milk, and we put on different clothes, and I found a ski outfit, and I felt I don't know where I get the sense, I felt I'm safer dressed as a boy. I had very short hair, I was skinny, and I felt I'm safer being dressed as a boy as a girl, being between that peasant instinct, or that, I don't know where I got it. I dressed as a boy in a navy blue ski outfit. I put on men's shoes. And I don't know, as the other girls do. Our hair was short, and I looked just as much as a boy as a girl. And we went in looting to the houses. The houses were open. It was anything you could take. And I remember we went into a store, and there was money galore. The store was deserted. And we took fabrics, and we took, I don't know what we did. We carried things with us that just bogged us down. We felt if we're going to come home, we have no parents, we have nothing. We have to have something to make ourselves clothes. And being I was a dressmaker, first thing I was thinking, to get some fabric. I can't believe it. And I told other girls too, we loaded up on fabrics with suitcases, and we schlepped it with us for maybe a week. I organized, anyway, all the bridges were done, all the trains were, everything was just chaos. And we felt we can't stay there because the people were just like wild. The Russians came, they were drunk, they raped girls, they shoot anybody. Germans, they were shooting left and right, for revenge. They really let them have it. And one day, we were sitting in a farm, and we were cooking some food. And there was Russian prisoners of war. There were soldiers that were also in that camp. And we told them, we didn't tell them we are Jewish, we told them we are Czech girls. And they were started to get very friendly. And I had a girlfriend, her name was Shifra, like my granddaughter's name is Shifra. And my name was Feigetzer was Františka, or Anna, or the other one was whatever. And her name was Shifra, and it was very hard to translate to Czech, so we called her Shifra. So that Russian prisoner of war heard that, he called Shifra, he says, "You're not Czech, you're Jewish." And we finally admitted. He was very happy that we were Jewish. He says, "Don't worry, you're safe here, I'll protect you," and everything else. So we were happy that there is a Jewish guy to see, a nice Jew, and was friendly, he was telling us what he went through and how happy he is to be alive. Anyway, there was people, thousands of people milling back and forth. It was just like, I can't describe it to you, just like people, the next day after we were liberated. I don't know if you can picture it, but nobody believed that we really were alive. And the same is with the soldiers, with the Russian people too. It was something like, it looked so hopeless at one time that we thought we'll never make it. Anyway, we were already changed clothes, and we were already eating. A lot of people died, they overate, they ate the wrong food, and they died 2 or 3 days later or the same day. Somehow or other we were okay. This guy, anyway, we came to these 7 girls in one room. And he talked us into, he's going to protect us, he's going to sleep, this Russian soldier, he's going to sleep with us in the same room. Terrific idea. He says, how can you be luckier than this guy? First thing, he started to attack me. And that Shifra, she saved my life, she beat him up so badly. She was strong, she was rough, and next day we had to leave. We just felt, this Jewish guy, he acted like an animal towards us. First he said he was so happy to be with us, and we trusted him to be in the room, to be our protector. Next day, I managed to get a horse and wagon, and we loaded up the wagon with the suitcases of the fabric. I want you to know that. And we're going to go we figured out which way to go backwards, towards Czechoslovakia, because Berlin, what were we doing in Berlin? Most of the train didn't go. People waited days somehow to weeks actually. Anyway, we thought by horse and wagon we'll manage to go backwards a day, 5-10 kilometers, and for a week everything was fine. I found somehow organized 2 horses in a wagon, and I knew I was raised on a farm. My father, we always had horses, and I used to ride horses when it was really a typical peasant farm, Jewish farm girl, and I was very handy. I just felt I couldn't be alive. That's unbelievable. We hitched up the wagon, put on the suitcases with the fabric, we put on whatever food we could. finally we made maybe 5-10 kilometers, find another farm. We felt we can't sleep in our downstairs because we were afraid of the Russians. So we used to go on a barn, pick up the ladder with us at night. You know, to go on the upper barn.
On the loft.
On the loft, pick up the ladder with us. In the day, it was still safe. Managed to somehow struggle through.
We're going to have to be ending in a minute. I want you.
That's it?
In a few minutes, in a couple of
Okay.
minutes.
So that went along till we finally came to Poland, to Lodz. And there we managed to get on a train. 3 or 4 days we were waiting on the train, and every time a train came, it was all full. And we were sitting in the station, and somehow we managed to get a little bit of food. Next train was empty. Till one day, 3 or 4 Russian soldiers, they kept eyeing us. We were so afraid of them to make eye contact. Finally, they kept saying, "Amchu, Amchu," and we didn't understand that was a code word in Poland, but we never heard that code word. "Amchu, that are you our own?" And finally he said something in Yiddish, and he says, "Yes." And we were really starving because there was nothing to buy. Within 5 minutes, he brought milk and bread and butter. And the first train that came, he managed to put us on the train. And that's when we wound up closer to Czechoslovakia. But not really, because 2 of the girls got sick and they wound up in the hospital. And we waited 6 weeks in another Polish town in Novi Sad. And there were already about 100 Jewish people, most of men that came from the army. And they set up a Jewish community. And when we came there, these 7 girls, they put us up in 2 rooms and brought us food and really acted like Jews. And we already had marriage proposals. And
That was already the end of the war.
So this was already the end.
Before we end, I wanted to make sure that you showed us the portrait.
This portrait was done. I am the one who was taking the picture because I'm not.
Lean it back on you.
This is my mother. Her name was Plima. She was, I think, 48 or 49.
Rest it on your lap. You lean back, and then lean the picture back against you.
Fine.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, up a little bit. That's it. Perfect.
This is a cousin who came from Budapest for a visit, and that was her camera, because a camera was something like really a big novelty to take a picture. And she was the one who survived on Gentile papers in Hungary, and she gave, that was a small little picture, and then we enlarged it. This is a cousin. She was, I think, 16 or 17. She didn't make it either. Only her father and a younger sister survived. Her father is in the 80s and lives in Israel, and sister lives in Cleveland. This is my younger sister, Rachel. She was 17. She was a beautiful girl. At that time, she had some kind of a sickness, so she's very skinny. But otherwise, she was a beautiful, well-developed girl, and she unfortunately didn't make it. And here...
On the other side is your other sister.
Oh, this was a 15-year-old girl, Ghetto, and only her head is showing. And she didn't make it either. So from all these pictures is only this girl alive.
And you who took the picture.
And I who took the picture. And that was in 1941 or 42. I don't remember exactly. And that's the only picture I have. Otherwise, I would never even remember how my mother looked.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to end this part now.